A desperate decree echoes through an empty palace. This is the chaotic final century of the Western Roman Empire, a world unraveling at the seams. Our story is not just about empires falling, but about the men who were supposed to hold them together. It is a mystery of personal despair, a deep dive into the shattered lives of the last Roman emperors. By the end, you will understand the true human cost of collapse, seen through the eyes of the men trapped at the very top. We will uncover how political decay and relentless pressure warped the minds of rulers, turning the imperial purple into a cloak of dread. What does the broken spirit of a leader reveal about the death of an entire world? The year was 410, and the unthinkable had happened. A barbarian army, the Visigoths under King Alaric, had breached the walls of Rome itself. The Eternal City, which had stood unconquered for nearly 800 years, was now being looted by foreign soldiers. The psychological shockwave this sent across the ancient world is almost impossible for us to fully grasp today. But to understand the depth of that despair, we must look not to the streets of Rome, but to a quiet, fortified palace over 150 miles to the north, in the city of Ravenna. There we find the emperor who was supposed to defend it all, a young man named Honorius. His reign, from 395 to 423, stands as the ultimate case study in imperial denial. He was a ruler so profoundly disconnected from reality that his response to this catastrophic news has echoed through history as a symbol of terminal decay. The story goes that when a courtier rushed in to tell the emperor that Rome had perished, Honorius looked up in genuine shock and grief. He was silent for a moment, devastated. Then he spoke, he asked, "But it has just eaten from my hands." The courtier, confused, had to clarify. He was not speaking of the emperor's pet chicken, a prized bird he had named Roma. He was speaking of the city, the heart of the empire, now in flames. This anecdote, whether entirely true or embellished, captures the essence of Honorius. He had been raised not as a leader of men, but as a sheltered prince in a gilded cage. His entire world was the isolated, marshy security of Ravenna, a city surrounded by water and walls, deliberately chosen as an imperial capital because it was easy to defend and, more importantly, easy to hide within. While generals fought desperate battles and provinces slipped away, Honorius lived a life of ritual and luxury, utterly insulated. His survival and what little stability his reign had was owed entirely to one man, his regent and father-in-law, the half-Vandal general Stilicho. Stilicho was the real power, the brilliant military mind holding the crumbling frontiers together. For years he managed the impossible, juggling barbarian threats, political rivals, and a shrinking treasury. But in 408, in a move of staggering short-sightedness, Honorius had Stilicho executed, believing false rumors of treason. With his one capable protector gone, the door was flung wide open. Alaric, who had been negotiating with Stilicho, now found no one of substance to parley with, and he marched on Rome. So when the news of the sack finally reached Ravenna, it revealed a chilling truth. The myth of Rome's eternal, divine protection was dead. The city of Romulus and Remus, of the Caesars and the Senate, could be violated, and the man wearing the purple, the Augustus of the West, was more concerned for the safety of a chicken than the fate of millions. Was Honorius simply incompetent, a weak-minded fool, or was his behavior a kind of psychological retreat, a mind so overwhelmed by the scale of the collapse it was witnessing that it could only focus on the small, controllable things within its immediate vicinity, like a beloved pet? The visual contrast is stark. Imagine the lavish, serene mosaics of Ravenna's palaces depicting the emperor as a divine, powerful figure, then cut to the smoky horizon of Rome, pillars toppling, treasures hauled away, and citizens fleeing. One man sits at the calm, artificial center of the storm, a puppet who no longer even knows who is pulling his strings because the hands have all been cut off. His despair was not the active, agonizing kind of a fighter who is lost. It was the passive, hollow despair of a spectator, watching the end of the world from the best seat in the house and misunderstanding the play entirely. Honorius died in his bed in Ravenna, a fate his successors would rarely share. The decades that followed his reign were a dizzying carousel of emperors, each one grasping for a throne that was now little more than a chair balanced on a crumbling cliff. Then in 457, something remarkable happened. A soldier named Majorian was proclaimed emperor by the army. He was not a palace puppet or a child heir. He was a battle-hardened veteran who had fought alongside the last great Roman general, Aetius. In him, a flicker of the old Roman spirit seemed to reignite. For the first time in generations, the empire had a ruler who did not just wear the purple, but who seemed determined to earn it. Majorian understood that the empire was bleeding from 1,000 cuts, and his first act was not to raise another army, but to pass laws. He issued sweeping reforms to curb the corruption of the tax collectors, to repopulate abandoned towns, and to protect the common citizens from the abuses of the wealthy elite. He knew that to rebuild an army, he first had to rebuild the economy and the trust of the people. It was a stunning display of clarity and purpose. With the home front somewhat stabilized, he turned to the frontiers. In a series of brilliant campaigns, he marched into Gaul, now dominated by the Visigoths and Burgundians. He did not just defeat them in battle, he outmaneuvered them diplomatically, forcing them to reaffirm their status as allies of Rome. He crossed the Pyrenees into Spain, reclaiming territory and rallying local Roman loyalists. For a few glorious years, it looked as if the downward spiral could be reversed. The map was being stitched back together, piece by hard-won piece, but one colossal problem remained: the breadbasket of the empire. The province of North Africa, with its fertile grain fields, had been conquered by the Vandals decades earlier. They now ruled from Carthage, and their powerful navy strangled the Mediterranean, cutting off the vital food supply to Italy itself. Majorian knew that to truly save the West, he had to retake Africa. It was an audacious, monumental plan. He spent the winter of 460 in Spain, personally overseeing the construction of a massive invasion fleet. He gathered ships from every port still loyal to him. Imagine the scene: hundreds of vessels being built and assembled, a forest of masts along the Spanish coast, representing the last, best hope of Rome. And then, just as the fleet was ready to sail, disaster struck. The Vandal king, Gazeric, a cunning and ruthless foe, learned of the invasion plan, but he did not meet the fleet at sea. Instead, through bribery or the treachery of Roman officials who profited from the chaotic status quo, agents were sent into the Spanish harbors. In a single, devastating night, the fleet was set ablaze or sabotaged at its moorings. The Great Armada, the product of years of labor and hope, was reduced to smoldering wreckage. The invasion was over before it had begun. Majorian's dream was ashes. The despair that must have consumed him is almost palpable. This was not the confused despair of Honorius. This was the agonizing, clear-eyed despair of a man who had done everything right, who had the vision, the skill, and the will to succeed, only to see his life work destroyed by the very corruption and short-sightedness he had fought against. He was betrayed not by a foreign enemy on the battlefield, but by the rot within his own system. He returned to Italy a broken man. The powerful general who had placed him on the throne, a man named Ricimer, now saw a failed emperor, a spent force. Within months, Majorian was arrested, stripped of his purple cloak, and executed. He was 41 years old. His reign lasted just 4 years. In that short time, he proved that the empire could still produce leaders of immense talent and integrity. But his tragic end proved something far more chilling: that the system itself was now too diseased to be saved by even the best of men. The hope he represented was not slowly extinguished, it was violently crushed, a fire deliberately smothered by those who preferred the darkness. After Majorian, no emperor would ever again dare to dream so boldly. The throne became a death sentence, and ambition itself was a fatal flaw. With Majorian's death, the mask was finally off. The man who ordered his execution, the Germanic general Ricimer, did not even bother to claim the purple for himself. He knew the title of emperor was now a curse, a target painted on a man's back. Instead, for over 15 years, Ricimer became the shadow emperor, the true power in the West. He was a kingmaker, but his kingdom was a graveyard of failed rulers. He would handpick a pliable candidate, often an elderly aristocrat with no military power of his own, place him on the throne in Ravenna, and then pull the strings. When that emperor became too independent or simply too inconvenient, Ricimer would have him deposed and often murdered. The cycle repeated, a grim carousel of creation and destruction. The message to the Roman aristocracy was clear. The empire was no longer ruled by law or lineage, but by the whim of one general and his army. This created an atmosphere of pure, corrosive paranoia. Who would want to be emperor under such conditions? The answer, by the year 475, was almost no one of consequence. Into this vacuum of power and hope stepped a final, poignant figure, a boy of perhaps 14 or 15 named Romulus. His father, a military officer named Orsts, had seized control of what was left of the government, but Orsts, perhaps learning from Ricimer's example, also refused the throne. He placed his young son there instead, giving him the grand, historically loaded name Romulus Augustulus. It was a name heavy with unintended irony, Romulus, after the mythical founder of Rome. Augustus, after its first and greatest emperor, and the diminutive Augustulus, little Augustus. He was a child emperor in a collapsing state, a living symbol that had shrunk to a pathetic scale. His reign was a non-event. He issued no laws of consequence, led no armies. His face, young and smooth, was stamped on coins that circulated in an ever-shrinking territory, a hollow promise of authority. The power still lay with the army, but now that army was almost entirely comprised of Germanic foederati, hired soldiers who demanded land in Italy as payment for their service. When Orsts refused this demand, the soldiers turned against him. They found a new leader in one of their own, a commander named Odoacer. Orsts was captured and executed. And then Odoacer marched on Ravenna. There was no grand battle for the soul of the empire. In 476, Odoacer simply entered the city, went to the palace, and confronted the young emperor. He did not kill the boy. He showed a strange, almost respectful mercy. Romulus was persuaded to abdicate, to formally surrender the imperial insignia, the crown and the purple cloak. He was then sent into a comfortable exile at a lavish villa in Campania, given a generous pension, and vanished from history. The despair here is not personal, but institutional. It is the despair of an idea breathing its last. The office of emperor, once the most powerful position on earth, had been reduced to a ceremonial role for a teenager, a role so meaningless that his removal was a quiet administrative formality, not a world-shaking event. The Western Roman Empire did not fall with a dramatic crash that day. It simply ceased to be because everyone, from the barbarian general to the Roman senators, had stopped believing in it. The boy with the giant name, little Augustus, lived out his days in peaceful obscurity, a living ghost of a world that had already passed away. But the story of the last Roman emperors does not end with a quiet abdication in Ravenna. There is a final, lingering echo, a legal fiction that stretched the empire's official death for another 4 years. To understand it, we must look east, to the glittering capital of Constantinople. There, another emperor still ruled, overseeing what we now call the Byzantine Empire, but which he and his court simply considered the Roman Empire. From this eastern vantage point, the events in Italy looked very different. They did not recognize Odoacer's takeover, nor did they accept the abdication of Romulus Augustulus as legitimate. In their view, the rightful emperor of the West was a man named Julius Nepos. Nepos had been installed by the Eastern Emperor just a year before Odoacer's coup, but he had been driven out of Italy by Romulus's father, Orsts. He fled to the coastal province of Dalmatia, modern-day Croatia, where he set up a court in the fortified city of Salona. And there he remained for 5 long years, a sovereign without a kingdom. He minted coins bearing his own image and title. He was still formally addressed as Augustus by the court in Constantinople. In every legal and diplomatic sense, the Eastern Empire insisted that Julius Nepos was the true Western Roman emperor, and that Odoacer was merely a temporary regent governing Italy on his behalf. This created a bizarre political reality. Odoacer, the barbarian king ruling Italy with an iron fist, dutifully sent the imperial insignia from Ravenna to Constantinople. He did not claim the title of emperor for himself. Instead, he asked the Eastern emperor to grant him the status of a patrician, a high Roman honor, and to let him administer Italy as a subordinate. The East agreed, but with one condition, that he acknowledge Nepos as his sovereign. It was a delicate, absurd dance. Everyone knew the truth. Nepos, sitting in his seaside fortress hundreds of miles away, had no army, no treasury, and no practical authority over a single acre of Italian soil. His empire was a line on a diplomatic parchment, a ghost of legitimacy that the East refused to let fade. This is where we encounter a new kind of despair, the despair of irrelevance. Julius Nepos was a legal technicality, a figurehead whose entire power existed only in the letters and formal proclamations exchanged between capitals. He was clinging to a title that had lost all its substance, a man shouting into a void that no longer echoed back. What must that have been like to wake each day in Salona, knowing you are the Roman emperor, but that your commands mean nothing beyond the walls of your own villa? His end was as grimly fitting as his reign. In the year 480, he was murdered by his own retainers, victims of a personal grudge or a local political plot. It was a sordid, small-scale death for a man who represented a 1,000-year legacy, and with his death, the legal fiction finally snapped. There was no longer even a theoretical Western emperor for the East to recognize. This is why some historians mark 480, not 476, as the true, legal end of the Western Roman Empire. The debate over the exact end date is itself revealing. It shows our own difficulty and the difficulty of the people living through it in pinpointing the moment something so vast and ancient truly dies. Was it when the last child emperor gave up his crown? Or was it when the last man with a legitimate claim to that crown stopped breathing? The prolonged claim of Julius Nepos tells us that empires do not always end with a single catastrophic event. Sometimes they end with a whisper, with a stubborn refusal to admit what everyone can already see, a ghost that lingers long after the body has turned to dust. The despair here is not of battle or betrayal, but of sheer, undeniable obsolescence. It is the sound of a door closing on an empty room, long after the party has ended and everyone has gone home. From the bewildered denial of Honorius to the hollow legal fiction of Julius Nepos, we have traced a chilling evolution of despair. It begins as confusion, a mind refusing to process the scale of the disaster. It hardens into the bitter clarity of a Majorian, who sees the solution but is sabotaged by the very decay he seeks to cure. Then it curdles into the cynical manipulation of the Ricimer era, where power is stripped of all pretense and the throne becomes a sacrificial altar. Finally, it fades into the ghostly irrelevance of Nepos, a title without a territory, a claim echoing in an empty room. This is not the story of a single catastrophic battle, but of a slow, psychological suffocation. The cage, gilded with tradition and purple cloth, grew smaller and more inescapable with each passing decade. The emperors within it were not just failing to save an empire, they were losing the ability to even comprehend what saving it would mean. Their personal tragedies, the misplaced grief, the shattered ambition, the quiet abdication, the meaningless murder, are the human fractures along the fault line of a collapsing world. What does this procession of broken men teach us? It reveals that systemic collapse is often a crisis of legitimacy long before it becomes a crisis of borders. When the symbols of power become detached from real authority, when loyalty is only to a paycheck or a warlord, the center cannot hold. The story of the last Roman emperors is a masterclass in the human cost of that unraveling. It shows us power at the breaking point, a burden so heavy it crushes the spirit long before the body falls. The Western Roman Empire did not end with a bang, but with a series of whimpers, a child sent to a villa, a soldier betrayed by his own, a ghost emperor waiting for a letter that would never restore his kingdom. Each whimper was the sound of a man, and an idea finally giving up, so we leave you with a question. In this gallery of final portraits whose despair resonates most deeply with you, is it the tragic potential of Majorian, the man who almost did it, or the haunting obscurity of Romulus Augustulus, the boy who symbolized an end? Perhaps you see parallels in other last stands throughout history, other leaders who inherited a crumbling edifice and a crown of thorns. Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to join us as we unravel more historical mysteries, where the human heart meets the turning point of eras, be sure to subscribe.